Hello, and welcome in this session about resilience, food safety governance to anticipate on microbial food safety challenges. This presentation is the result of the research conducted by Mathis Vermeers as PhD student, guided with postdoc Pauline Spagnoli, and under my supervision, I'm Professor Liesbeth Jacxsens. We are all working in the Department of Food Technology, Safety and Health of the Faculty of Bioscience Engineering of Ghent University, and this research was conducted in the frame of the European project Food Saver. So FAO, they brought up some years ago an important report on the future of food and agriculture. And also within the European Commission, with the Green Deal, a transformation towards a more efficient, inclusive, resilient and sustainable agri-food system is anticipated. We want to have a better food production, better nutrition, a better environment, and a better life, with including the principle of leaving no one behind. So our food system is in fully transformation, and this puts, of course, a lot of pressures on the governance of microbial and also chemical food safety. But in this presentation, we really focus on the microbial food safety. So our food systems are in transition, there are a lot of pressures, and these pressures can also be recalled as drivers. So these may have an impact on our food safety, and this was also acknowledged by FAO, and they made the report thinking about the future of food safety, a foresight report. So these are two important documents that one can read. So within the Food Saver project, we try to identify the drivers of change. So which are these drivers which are changing our food systems and like this have an impact on the microbial food safety output of our food system. And typically drivers can be categorized according to the STEEP categorization. So S stands for social, T stands for technological, E stands for economic, the other E stands for environmental drivers, and finally we also have the political drivers. So within this STEEP categorization and within the framework of the Food Saver project, together with our colleagues from the Australian Institute of Technology, AIT, and Wageningen, we co-created those drivers. And here you can find two papers where the outcome of this identification of drivers was conducted. I go immediately in detail of which drivers we all identified. Maybe a little bit now first on how are these drivers influencing our food safety and potential risks related to our food production and our food system in a broader perspective. And on this also FAO has published recently a very important document. So you can really read these three consecutive documents about how our food system is changing, which drivers have an impact, which impact this may have on food safety. Because indeed these drivers, according to that STEEP categorization, they are really macro level factors. So they can be societal changes, technological changes, environmental changes, economical changes, and political changes, which have in one way or another way an impact on our food system. And like this, they will also impact our food safety status of the foods and raw materials which are produced in our food system. Due to the fact that we have a potential shift in our food safety hazards, also emerging risks may occur. Yes, so emerging risks are defined, for instance, by EFSA as risks which are resulting, on the one hand, it can be the case of newly identified hazards which didn't pop up before, and which are leading to a significant exposure. And of course, you know that hazard and exposure becomes a risk. Yeah. It's also possible that we have known hazards, for instance salmonella, but with new exposure routes, because we have new food production systems, because we have novel foods which are introduced, and this may also result to an emerging risk. And a third way of introducing emerging risks are a known hazard, but our host susceptibility is changing. For instance, because we have certain population groups which are more susceptible. Think about the growing number of elderly and people with weaker immune systems, so our host susceptibility towards microbial hazards, towards microbial pathogens is increasing, and like this we are also having a potential emerging hazards. So these drivers have an impact on our food system, and due to that fact, potential emerging risks are occurring. Due to the fact that we have new identified hazards, due to the fact that we have new exposure routes, or due to the fact that our population is changing. So I promised to give you an overview of the different drivers which we identified in the frame of the Food Safer projects, so which are relevant for microbial food safety and which were identified in a collaboration with our European stakeholders. So for social drivers, three important drivers have been identified. Consumer behavior, demographic development, and health and well-being. Technological drivers, it's about technologies in food production, so this is then more on the level of the agricultural raw material production, and technologies in food processing. From economical drivers, the distribution and the change on how we distribute foods. Think about food donations on the one hand, think about the e-commerce, last mile delivery. These are all dynamics which are changing our classical food distributions. From environmental drivers, we have environmental contamination. We have management of natural resources, and of course also climate change. A good example is due to climate change, there is a lot of pressure on water availability and water quality, and this of course may also impact the microbial food safety of, for instance, fresh produce. If farmers start to irrigate with contaminated waters, then of course the plants and the vegetables or herbs also get contaminated. And finally, within the group of political drivers, we have on the one hand legislation, policies and governance, and on the other hand we have the geopolitical instability. So these major drivers were identified within a focus on potential microbial hazards. So I will give now some examples of certain drivers and how this can impact our microbial food safety. We will not go through everything, so we selected here 2 examples. On the one hand, we have the driver, which is belonging to the social driver categorization on consumer behavior. We know that consumer behavior is impacting our food system a lot. How? Due to the fact that there is a change in dietary choice. Think about the shift from animal-based proteins to plant-based proteins. So people are consuming less animal-derived products, eat less meat, less fish. Of course, the protein intake must be compensated, so that's why these plant-based foods are becoming important. And of course, also plant-based foods can have their challenge in microbial food safety. It can also be linked to consumer knowledge and consumer awareness attitude. So how are people behaving with foods? Are they aware about the hazards? So these are typical drivers which also impact food safety. Think about a trend in eating raw cookie dough. Of course, raw cookie dough is not a ready-to-eat product. It has to be heated. It has to be baked in the oven. So if certain trends are occurring like that, people are not aware about the potential hazards, and then, of course, this may impact our microbial food safety within Europe. Another example is then more on the level of political drivers, and this is then the example of geopolitical instability. So there we can identify two situations. On the one hand, war and conflicts. Think about a war and a conflict between nations. Like this, for instance, trade of raw materials is disrupted. And so food business operators need to change from their normal supply of raw materials to another region, to another trade situation where maybe they don't have always the proper information about presence of pathogens, presence of food safety management system within the suppliers, etc. A very good example is the war with Russia and Ukraine. Ukraine, which is a very important agricultural country for Europe. So a lot of raw materials are coming from there for our European food production. Of course, if this trade was interrupted due to the war and conflict, then our European food business operators had to go elsewhere to find, for instance, cereals, to find sunflower oil, etc. And this may impact knowledge and information about microbial food safety. Another example is on fragmentation of nations. Think about trade barriers, tariffs, regulatory difference between regions. This also does not help in facilitating food safety and also not microbial food safety. So these were two examples of drivers which were belonging to a complete different category, but just to illustrate how these drivers are impacting our food system and may have an impact then on the microbial safety of the products which are produced within Europe. So if we now translate this on the level of a food business operator, so every food business operator within Europe needs to have a food safety management system based on prerequisite programs and HACCP. Every food business operator will operate in a certain context. Every country has a certain way of controlling food safety with the national food safety authorities, with the monitoring, etc., etc. So within that context, a food business operator need to set up their food safety management system. Of course, we have there these steep drivers which are more linked to the external business environment. So these are the changes which are occurring and which are impacting our food system, as I just explained. And of course, those drivers are also impacting our food business operator. Actually, they can impact in two ways. If we follow the blue line, so then we are fostering innovation within a food business operator. So the drivers are occurring and they are fostering innovations. A good example on this is maybe the example that I gave about dietary patterns and shifts in consumer preferences. Think about the protein shift, that we shift away from animal-based foods towards plant-based foods. This is leading to a lot of innovations within food businesses in Europe. Companies are looking, how can we make plant-based cheeses? How can we make plant-based drinks? Can we reformulate our products in order to have more plant-based proteins instead of having animal-based proteins? So this will lead to innovations, and of course, if innovations are occurring, we need to go through the research and development process, and also the food safety management system need to be adapted. We have to relook, for instance, into our HACCP system to implement those innovative products. So innovation is really a more like soft change, let's say, more on the long term, where food businesses will invest as an answer on these changes which are happening there in the broader food system. On the other hand, and this is then this yellow arrow here, it's also possible that a certain driver is creating a food safety shock. The other example that I gave about war and conflict, this is something which is happening suddenly, and there is a disruption of the trade, and of course food products need to be produced, so that's why a food business needs then on the short term, for instance, to look for other suppliers, to go into other regions to source for raw materials. So this is not really an innovation, but it's really a food safety shock. And it's impacting directly. That's also why we have this yellow flash here. It's impacting directly and acutely our food safety management system, because suddenly we don't have, let's take cereals, we don't have cereals anymore from Ukraine to produce our cookies. So we need to look to another region, and maybe other microbial hazards will be linked to that. So that's why at that moment this resilience strategy comes into place. So with resilience strategy means that we need to be ready, to anticipate on potential food safety shocks in order to avoid that our production, in order to avoid that our food safety management system is disrupted. So just to refresh, what do we mean with the food safety management system? So food safety management system is, from legal perspective, obligatory in all food business operators within Europe. So that's embedded in our general food law, that European Regulation 178 from the year 2002. So on the one hand, we need to implement our prerequisite programs based on good hygienic practices and good manufacturing practices. Think about cleaning, pest control, personal hygiene. These are all these PRPs. And on the other hand, we also need to have, as a basic conditions, procedures for traceability, recall, communication. So this is our basic or pillar of our food safety management system. And on top of this pillar, we will also make our HACCP study. So we will have our hazard analysis, critical control point analysis done. So like this, we have our critical control points that we, as a food business operator, can monitor during production. So this is our food safety management system. So as said, every food business operator will have a food safety management system based on these prerequisite programs and HACCP. We can also make a deviation between quality control activities and quality assurance activities, QC and QA. So typically within quality control, we talk about preventive measures. These are then our prerequisite programs. We have our interventions. They are more linked to our critical control points, like a heating step, for instance, or a metal detector to remove physical hazards. We have our monitoring to follow up our critical control points. And of course, we will implement this all. On the other hand, we have quality assurance activities, so that's then more about validation, verification, and documentation. So this is our food safety management system. Every food business operators have a food safety management system more at the basic level or more an advanced level. With advanced level, we mean that it's fully validated, fully tailored towards the situation of a certain company. And on the basis of this food safety management system, foods are produced with a certain food safety level. So we can think about sampling, for instance, and don't find any pathogens. So we can measure our food safety output on different ways. But of course, also there, it's possible that we have a good food safety output with minor problems, but it's also possible that some companies have a more poor food safety output. Okay, and this is influenced for sure by what we call the context, the business context of food business operators. So this is typically the normal aspects as the organization of a business, the environment of a business. This means and the suppliers and the customers, the characteristics of the product and the characteristics of the process. So these are these internal business contexts. So here also, it's possible that you have a high-risk context, because your product is very sensitive to microbial contamination. Think about smoking salmon. We know that this process is really very sensitive towards proliferation of Listeria monocytogenes. So companies which are performing smoking activities of fish, they have a high risk context. So it means that their food safety management system should be at a more advanced level in order to be able to produce smoked fish with a limited prevalence of Listeria monocytogenes. If such a type of companies don't have a very good performing food safety management system, so for instance, a food safety management system more at the basic level, well, at that time, most probably they will have like a poor food safety output, and they will have problems with accumulation of Listeria, for instance, in the production environment, which is then contaminating the food products. So this is business as usual, let's say, without the shocks which can come from that broader food system. And so now I will add indeed the layer of those drivers which are provoking a shock on your food safety management system. So these drivers are there in that external business environment, in our broader food system, and they will provoke food safety shocks on our food safety management system. So they will play in a certain part of our food safety management system, and the question is then indeed, can we guarantee the same microbial food safety at the end? Again, imagine the political driver that we said, war and conflict. So suddenly there is a conflict in a certain region. We cannot harvest there anymore. We cannot source there anymore for our raw materials. So this will impact our food safety management system. It will have an impact on our quality control activities, because suddenly we get raw materials that we are not used to. So maybe we need to sample again. Maybe we need to change our production process because they are slightly higher contaminated. So we need to change our interventions. We need to change our critical control points. We need to go to validate again our HACCP study, etc., in order to be able to produce the same level of product safety. So these shocks really have an input on our food safety management system, on the different activities. And the question is indeed, how can food businesses then anticipate? How can they absorb these shocks in order to produce, again, a very good food safety outputs. And now Mathis will go to the next step to bring you further in this story, and will also lead you towards the tools that we developed so that food business operators or risk managers can identify major drivers and how they are impacting their food safety management system. Thank you very much.
In context of microbiological food safety and food businesses, drivers may stimulate innovation and continuous improvements, but may also lead to food safety shocks, all of which can influence the food safety performance of the food business. And innovation is defined as intentional and long-term strategies, while food safety shocks we define as unwanted disruptions related to the increasing presence or emergence of food safety hazards. They are unwanted instead of intentional with innovation, and unanticipated. However, the unanticipated, if we speak about resilient actions, we might want to anticipate to those food safety shocks. And I'll give an example to make the difference between innovation and food safety shocks with the driver of climate change. Climate change can be an acute source of food safety shocks. Think about extreme weather events like droughts or floods, but can also host a slow process of temperature change. And temperature change induces long-term intentional innovation strategies. And to conceptualize this and the link between the driving forces, the external environment, and the resilient response, we use the model of DPSIR, which is driving forces, pressure, state, impact, and response. Driving forces were already defined before in this video. Pressures are the result of the driver, the influence of the driver to food safety. The state is then the current situation of the external business environment, and when this aligns perfectly with your food safety management, the measure of the state might be a measure of food safety performance. Then we have the impact, that's the mechanism of the environmental change of the driver to the food safety management system, so the control and assurance activity, which may then of course influence your food safety performance. And then the response, or the resilient response, are the actions we can take to anticipate on the food safety shocks, to cope with them during the adverse event when the shock is happening, and also to learn from them or transform afterwards. I spoke about resilience, and I'll give some definitions of resilience. First one from 2015, resilience defined as the capacity over time of a food system and its units at multiple levels to provide sufficient, appropriate, and accessible food to all in the face of various and even unforeseen disturbances. So this definition is more focused on the food system and food security. Then the next definition was the first definition to include food safety in a resilience definition. It's the recovery and adaptation capacity of the food supply chain to food safety shocks to allow the delivery of safe food over a reasonable lead time. So from food system to food supply chain and food safety. And then the last definition is really on the organizational level, so linked to the food business, is the ability of the food safety management system to survive supply chain shocks or incidents which are associated with increased food safety risks. And in this last definition, I want to focus on the resilience strategy, really the resilient response. So responses include those strategies, those actions that enable food businesses to build capacities to manage the food safety shocks which are caused by the drivers. Important note here is that even when a food business is resilient, they are still vulnerable to the changing and dynamic external environment, but their strength is having built the capacity to manage food safety shocks and the ability to realign their external environment to their food safety management system. And to work towards resilience and to help, we built 2 self-assessment tools for food businesses, but also sector associations can use it and risk managers like food safety authorities can use it. The self-assessment tools We have two of them. Tool one is really about the drivers of change and the impact of those drivers on core food safety management activities. And the second one really focuses on the actions, the resilient response strategies. Why would you use those self-assessment tools? It offers for food business operators a powerful way to strengthen and future-proof their management practices. It starts with the drivers of change, really understanding the dynamic external environment and getting insights in the drivers of change and to project those drivers on their organization. With this, the food business gains insight in how those external drivers translate to food safety pressures and what the specific mechanism of impact is of those pressures on their core food safety management activity. With the second tool then, which explores the resilient response strategies, businesses gain insight in how they can anticipate, cope, or learn from food safety shocks which are happening. And both tools are available with an introduction and instruction video for self-assessment, and then later on a video with results, case studies, while we use the tools with the Belgian food processing industry will also become available. And then similarly for the sector associations and risk managers, so in a region or country, insight in the drivers of change are valuable to set priorities and understand the link between food safety shocks and resilient response strategies, because resilience, preparedness, and actions can be taken within the organization, within the food business, but also on the level of the supply chain or different actors together or mediated by the Food Safety Authority on regional level.